Hey guys, I'm coming here live to talk about something really interesting that I came across on Jeff Berlin's Facebook page. He has a lot of interesting thoughts about jazz, about music in general, about how music works, about how he sees music. And I thought it would be interesting to talk about it. There's a link here on this description if you want to check it out. I definitely recommend it because he shares a lot of really interesting things. Jeff Berlin, if you don't know, is an amazing bass player that I am a big fan of. And as you can see in his description on his Facebook, he's played with, among others, he's played with legends like Eddie Van Halen, Yes, Frank Zappa, John McLaughlin, Bill Evans. So this is like the top of the top. And in this specific case, I wanted to talk about this concept of there are no wrong notes in jazz. And this is what Jeff Berlin has to say about it. This is the post that he made, and it goes like this. Some quote the legendary Miles, who said, end quote, "It's not the note you play that's the wrong note, it's the note you play afterwards that makes it right or wrong," end quote. Miles and every contemporary of his strove to only play the right notes. Wrong notes didn't exist in his playing until Miles' art evolved on its own to where much of his playing was based in harmonic improvisation. His wrong note statement was based in resolution. This is why he said what he said. He knew how to harmonically resolve. His heart was a result of this. Most bass players that trust wrong note resolution aren't improvisers and haven't learned how to resolve. Resolution is the most important element in live performance. Nothing comes close to its importance. This is why wrong note resolution is unhelpful to you. Players often have no idea what to do once they accidentally chromatically hit a good scale tone. My suggestion is just to get back to the bass part without trying to polish the bad note. Forget Miles, just instantly correct your bass line. Why not? And I think it's a very interesting thought because usually in jazz, of course, as we know, they give you pretty much free range to play or do whatever you want. And when you're starting out, you have this idea that, of course, you can play whatever you want and it's all correct somehow. And if you play bass, especially, then you know how important it is to be very specific into what you're playing. And I think playing bass in jazz is very important to know how the foundation works, how the harmonic foundation of the music works. And there you have to be very specific. So it's quite interesting to see how different the way of an amazing bass player like Jeff Berlin thinks, and someone like Miles Davis, who's also an amazing improviser, thinks. There are some comments on the post that also have some interesting thoughts to share. Um, I think it's also interesting to go over them. Someone asks, what would be the difference between a wrong note and an approach note? The fact that it isn't in the sheet. So in this case, an approach note is, for example, when you play a note that is in the proximity of the note that you are targeting. So you are approaching it chromatically, so by a half step, or you're approaching it diatonically or through a sort of pattern. So you're within the tonality when you approach it. So in this case, it's like the obvious resolution of just sliding up or sliding down to the note that you want. And then there are no wrong notes because you're just a half step away from the correct note if you mess it up. And Jeff Berlin answers, An approach note isn't used to fix a mistake. They are intentional pitches used for melodic resolution, usually in jazz solos or maybe written melodies such as White Christmas. As bass education, the concept is flawed and incomplete. For bass players, it is practically an impossibility. Bassists don't know how jazz harmony works due to not being taught it. This means that they can't use the glitch note and intelligently use it for a meaningful resolution. Essentially, no wrong notes functions by accidental resolution, which means that the lesson seems not to be a good lesson to use. Someone else comments, not to mention, Miles Davis didn't play bass. The bass player has the responsibility of holding the song together rhythmically and harmonically. Miles Davis would not be happy with his rhythm section if he was making lots of mistakes. Further, Miles Davis was a master, meaning after thousands of hours of learning not to make mistakes, he could push limits and make mistakes sound right. Masters of their crafts, whether it be musicians, painters, athletes, or scientists, were all grounded in fundamentals before making the leap to mastery. I fear that in these times we want to skip right into the mastery part without seeing the fundamentals that are necessary to achieve it. And Jacqueline answers, your post absolutely nails the reality of Miles and allows that using him as an example of wrong note to right note practically doesn't apply to bass playing. Yeah, which makes a lot of sense. Also, of course, where Miles Davis plays a wrong note and resolves it is in a completely different register than a bass player. And I think that's also an important element. There are a couple more posts that came from this. Jeffrey later says, a poster shared maybe the best comment about the flawed approach of wrong note resolution, saying, wrong notes are way wronger down on the bottom than they are up in Miles Davis's range. He is right. Um, yeah, so that is a big difference. So you have different responsibilities when you play in a ensemble, and it's good to be aware of what you're doing and what other people are doing, so that you know when you can take these freedoms or when you can change these things or when you can apply these things. um, the no wrong notes post attracted a lot of comments. Discussion is a good thing. For bass players, it is practically an impossibility to use no wrong notes, as a horn player might do it. Bassists don't know how jazz harmony works due to not being taught it. This means that their ability to use a glitch note and intelligently use it for a meaningful resolution is not likely. Essentially, no wrong notes functions by accidental resolution, which means that the lesson is not result-oriented. Your thoughts are welcome. And to that, there's a couple more reactions. But yeah, as I said, when you are in an ensemble context or you're playing with other people, there are certain roles that have to be filled or can be filled depending on the idiom of the tune that you're playing. So let's say no one is playing the changes, maybe someone should be referencing the tune if you find that the tune itself is an important part of what you're playing in that time. Of course, you can all just let go the tune. You can start with playing the tune and let it go more and more the further on you play it. Or you can have other band members that make a statement by saying, no, I'm going to keep this part of the tune coming back while the other people are letting it more go. Just like in the Miles Davis quintet with, for example, Ron Carter and Tony Williams, how they play together. And the interchangeability aspect is also important, because that's what makes it so interesting. You don't know what's going to happen, and the band members also not. And if you're aware of these things, you can interchange with each other instead of having, oh, I want to do this or I want to do that. You can also think more, what does the performance needs? Do you want to maybe open it up a bit more, not let it be so square. Or the other side, maybe it's being a bit too loose. Maybe there should be more reference to the song. And the best way to do this is, of course, to let your ear and let your personal taste dictate what you should do. And the aspect of wrong notes, if they are wrong or not, is less important. The more important thing is, of course, what are you doing with those wrong notes. And in this context, the wrong notes, as usual, are referred as harmonically wrong or melodically wrong. Of course, you also have the rhythmic aspect that can also be wrong. And in that field, it's also open for interpretation, because just because you play maybe syncopated rhythm that's not as clear, or you're starting to drag, you're starting to lose some beats per minute, or let's say you're slowing down the song, you're playing quartet triplets that are maybe perhaps a bit too slow. It depends on the role that you are uh, taking over when you're playing. Let's say if you're taking the top, you're improvising, then you have more freedom onto how interpret those rhythms. Perhaps if you're more in a supportive role in that ensemble, and you start to let things go more, then maybe that's not necessarily what it needs. But if the other person that's on the improvisation role is aware of what you're doing, they can counteract it. They can then be more clear in their playing if they are hearing that you are not being it. And if you are aware of it as well, then you can make it work. If you're not aware of what each other is doing, of course, then you can still make it work, but it's going to feel more disconnected. Uh, I'm sure there's plenty of examples of this, especially if you play in jam sessions, you become more and more aware of these things that happen, and you learn how to deal with if people listen to you or not, or if you are listening or not. Maybe sometimes it's better not to listen if you're not being listened to, for example. And if you are being listened to, maybe it's good to play with that, because then you have more possibilities in your performance, and that's what makes it so interesting. So again, onto the discussion, there were some comments. I've often been amazed at the similarities between jazz and the Baroque era. Both Charlie Parker and Johann Sebastian Bach had almost the exact same modus operandi when composing. They would both compose new melodies over pre-existing chord progressions. Bird composed many rhythm changes, heads, and Bach would write inventions and fugue over pre-existing harmonies of his time. Not only that, basso continuo is basically an improvised bass part that the keyboard players of the time would improvise off of a figured bass chart. Essentially, a lead sheet that musicians would read to create a walking bass part or a basso continuo part. The parallels are quite striking, in my honest opinion. Someone else says, I feel like Victor's theory has more to do with stepping in on the wrong note, but still keeping the groove feel and resolving the issue easily by reaching up, down a semitone to find the right key. It's kind of a don't give up or stop playing philosophy. Just get in there, to which Jeff responds. So here, Victor is making a reference to Victor Wooten and probably some part of a masterclass that where he talked about this. Jeff Berlin answers, thanks for sharing. The message of the lesson is half-step repair, but the application doesn't apply to bass playing. In fact, the corrective action might not exist in bass art. Only high-pitched instrumentalists like Miles playing on jazz improvisation based on jazz harmony might have done this, but rarely. The no wrong note lesson encourages accidental resolution instead of understanding harmony, as all high-pitched instrumentalists do. The lesson for bass players isn't well thought out because it suggests a repair for a problem that mostly doesn't exist in bass playing. Someone else says, I think the no wrong notes approach can be used when a bass player is playing by himself or soloing. It's a matter of interpretation. Once you're back laying the foundation or harmonic chord qualities of a song or progression, there are definitely wrong notes that will not fit no matter what the approach is. Yeah, I think that it's an important point that this is not usually discussed very often, because in jazz you have a very open-ended approach that you can have when you're playing that gives a lot of possibilities and a lot of expression. But in the beginning, if you're starting out, I think it can also be confusing, because if everything is possible, then what should you do? And it's important to learn about the roles that you can fill in ensemble and in playing. This refers specifically to ensemble playing. Of course, if you're playing by yourself, you have uh, even more possibilities. And Jeff Berlin also answered a comment about solo playing, like when you're playing not in an ensemble context, but just by yourself. And there, Jeff Berlin says, playing by oneself has no rules and cannot be seen as anything other than self expression, which I agree. And it's important to make this distinction. The context is very important when you're playing. And I think Jeff Berlin has a lot of interesting thoughts about it. Usually, in his when he gives opinions, he's very matter of fact, and he's pretty outspoken and not really afraid of saying what he thinks or what he thinks, and that's fair. And I think that is good. And also, as long as you're open-minded and open to learning more, you should speak about it. And he has plenty of experience. He played with a lot of people, and he's very into the music. So obviously, what he's saying, if you listen to his music, has a lot of importance and adds a lot of context to what you're doing. And I think it's good to also listen to people who played a lot of good music and played with a lot of good musicians, to see what they say when they do talk about music. I think for myself, I also usually don't really talk here. Usually I'm more just playing music, and the I've never been much of. I had a period in the beginning where I was very interested in theory, in talking about music, in talking about music theory and learning all of these things. And at a certain point, I kind of got too much into it and too much into my own head, where nowadays I'm just trying not to think and just try to have a more intuitive approach, more enjoying mysteries of things that I don't understand, but as letting my ear kind of let letting my ear reach those places. So sometimes I don't necessarily know all of those things that I'm doing, and I'm learning to enjoy that more. And if you use the sound as the most important thing, I think you can get a lot out of it. However, I think it's also good to then start talking about these things, because usually the other side, the music theory side, that has a lot of people talking about it, but this side of letting more things go is usually not very discussed. And one of the nicest things about jazz is that there's a lot of things that we don't know. And most of the great musicians also didn't necessarily knew the theory that they were doing, or they didn't know like which scale they were playing, or necessarily like what are wrong notes and what are approach notes, and resolving those notes. It was very much intuitive. It was very much learning from the past masters that came before them, and then just letting their ears kind of dictate what they were playing, or applying concepts and more kind of letting things more mysteriously happen instead of knowing every single thing that you're doing. And that is also an important aspect that people should be talking about. And it's also probably most people that come to play music or to play jazz, they don't know necessarily what they're doing when they listen to it. And that's what's so nice about it, is like the mystery of, oh wow, what's happening, or I don't know what's going on, but it sounds great, right? It's, if it doesn't sound great but you know what's going on, it doesn't matter, because if you don't like how it sounds, why would you listen to it? Of course it's interesting, but it's just as interesting as if someone cooks a really interesting meal but it doesn't taste good. You can just look at it, but what are you going to do with this meal? You're just going to look at it, I guess. So it's nice to see things from a more practical aspect, which is not so abstract. It's good to have some practical jazz being discussed. So please let me know what you think of this. Also, let me know what you think about the idea of having more talking videos. And I hope this helped a bit in this concept of there are no wrong notes in jazz, but then from a more practical aspect. And yeah, feel free to comment, like, subscribe, all of these things. And I always try to answer everyone's comments. So please feel free to share, feel free to discuss. I'll join the discussion, of course. And I hope you enjoyed. And hopefully we'll do this more regularly. Hope you guys have a nice day, and see you next time.